Good morning and good afternoon to everybody, depending on where you are. Good morning from me over here. I am Rafael Alexandre Mello, and with me is my co-convener first, Nino Kemoklitsi. I'm not sure how to pronounce that, Nino, sorry. We are two of the three co-conveners of the International Relations to Social Science Working Group at BISA. Dr. Mathieu Grand-Piron is our third co-convener. Unfortunately, he could not be with us today, but in the next events, he should be here as well. So we are organizing a series of events called Understanding International Relations as a Social Science. So our primary concern has been to invite academics from throughout the world to talk about what they understand within these two concepts, right? So what is international relations, and what are the social sciences, right? And in a certain way, this is a epistemological question, right? Even a philosophical question that has methodological implications and analytical implications for how we do social sciences, for how we do international relations. So these are the questions that we're trying to get at with our series, right? And in selecting our guests, we're looking for well-established academics from different sub-areas of international relations with different foci and with different approaches, because we want to see what their views are on these issues, but also focused on what their research has been, you know. So how can we better understand these questions also by looking at their research, or looking at their views on these specific subjects that they're bringing. So for today, today's seminar, we have Dr. Vishwas Satgar from the University of Witwatersrand. He's going to present to us for about 40 minutes or so. Then we're going to start rounds of questions. Nino, did you want to say anything?
No, all good, Rafael. Just hello to everyone and welcome. Really looking forward to this. And thank you very much to Rafael, who's a mastermind of this event. And thanks for organizing everything, Rafael. And thank you everyone for coming along. Lovely to see you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Without much ado, I will pass on the word to Dr. Satgar.
Well, thank you, Rafael, and Nima and the subcommittee and BISA for providing me with this opportunity to engage with you. My topic has been framed, planetary challenges that require IRs to come to terms with natural and earth relations. So I'm going to kind of jump into this. I mean, if you're living in California, you probably woke up to floods over the past few days. You probably realize this was on top of a drought. And of course, wildfires that have happened now beyond a specific season. South Africa currently is on a heat wave warning in various provinces. And essentially, these climate shocks are now the new normal that we're all living. Our generation, all of you on this conversation, and good afternoon to you from where I am at, and those younger are aware that these climate realities are basically defining our world. It brings uncertainty and a high-risk future. At the same time, we are the ones that can solve this problem, the generation that has to rise to this task. And after us, it's going to be too late. Now, IR has not taken these realities on board and the larger ecological crisis. And today I'm going to kind of delve into some of the transgressive thinking that I've been doing, sort of lifting my head above the sort of ivory parapet of the discipline, to look to other disciplines to understand and explain what we are living, but also beyond the academy. The question I'm going to grapple with is, can we take IR in a new direction to engage with what's happening in our planetary life world. And I'm going to try and do this through a political ecology approach, or if you like, a decolonial Marxist feminist ecology perspective. Now, I want to start by bringing Earth into view. Earth, like all planets out there, are all very specific and very particular. There's no planet that's the same. You will have planets that might be similar to Earth at some point, and there's a search on for these exoplanets. But Earth, like other planets, is special. It is a solitary case study, if you like. It has gone through major changes, and over deep time, you know, once upon a time, it was a sort of ball of gas. And of course, it became increasingly a molten core with a crust. And then, of course, you had an oxygenation moment, and it became bursting, a planetary space bursting with life. So you have 4.5 billion years of geohistory, what I call geological revolutions that has marked our planet. And it's there within the geological record. It's there within the kind of strata of rock that layers our planet. Now, on this planet, there's a thin envelope, a very thin layer, if you like, of life. And this is a planet that really proliferates life. And the totality of the natural relations that make up this thin layer are called the biosphere. Nesting within this are ecosystems, and these ecosystems are all interconnected, and they are also part of the larger planetary system. Earth is essentially a living organism. It is, if you like, co-created by all the processes that shape it. Now, to help us understand Earth, there's been two bodies of knowledge and thought. Ecology, as a synthesis science, emerging from the mid-19th century, and of course, earth science, which is very recent, emerging out of the 1960s and 70s. We are also living through extinction. And if you were to kind of catalog the kind of dynamics and challenges we are facing, well, there's very, very reputable science and knowledge to inform how we think about extinction today on planet Earth. Earth scientists have given us planetary boundaries since 2009, and boundaries are essentially risk thresholds. If we overshoot these risk thresholds, we actually place in jeopardy planetary life. So far, since 2022, we've overshot the sixth boundary, and this relates to water use. In other words, we are extracting more water from the water cycle than we have. So at the same time, climate boundary has also been overshot, and I'm going to spend a lot of time in this presentation dealing with that particular challenge. We also have species extinction happening. Now, I want to make a distinction and hopefully bring a nuance to how we understand this. There's mass extinction, which obliterates the kind of biological life cycle and prospects of a species or a life form. But there's also what is called background extinction. And background extinction is really something that happens as part of a natural process, but it continues the tree of life. There's transmutation, there's evolution that happens in a particular species and life form, and it continues on its journey. So it's not as though, in common sense terms, that extinction is just natural. This is what happens. No, there are much more complex processes that happen. So 60% of mammals and reptiles, etc., have been wiped out since 1970. 40% of insect species are in decline and are endangered. And with the current rate of decline, we will have insect extinction by the end of the century. We also have ecosystem loss and fragmentation. Various biodiversity hotspots are switching their states rapidly. And this is a very important point about switching and the speed at which things are happening. If you look at algae bloom on coral reefs, or if you look at eutrophication in fresh water system, which sucks out oxygen, systems flip their state pretty fast. And this is a very powerful ecological insight, but also an insight that is informing the current Earth science that we have. Riverine systems are dead zones. US prairies, 98% of it is gone. The planet has lost half of its coral reef since 1950. 20% of the Amazon is gone, and 25% is at a tipping point. And Southeast Asia has the highest rate of deforestation at the moment on our planet. Wilderness is disappearing, and we're also having anonymous extinctions. What am I talking about? Only about 2 million life forms have been classified. There are probably about 8 million or more that we don't know about. So about 70% of land surface has been transformed in the context of shrinking wilderness. In short, we are having a crisis of life making. There's biological annihilation happening on our planet, and Earth is a crime scene. And we've got to ask who is responsible for what biologists call the super killing, and even, I would argue, the self-extermination. So moreover, how is Earth responding to all this violence, particularly the rupture in the climate system? Now, it's very, very important for us to put into perspective Earth science in this regard. According to Earth scientists, we've been living in what is called an Edenic period for the past 11,000 years, the Holocene epoch, if you like, in geological terms. And it's in this context that we had a relatively stable climate, and we were able to proliferate sedentary or civilization. We developed philosophy, we developed mathematics, we developed technologies, urban conglomerations, etc. But of course, with the use of coal, oil, and gas, we are now seeing tipping points flashing on our planet, and there are feedback loops contributing to greenhouses and the further planetary heating of our planet. We are now at a 1 degree Celsius overshoot since 2015. And essentially, we've begun the shift and transition to a new Earth. And this is a very, very important point for us to keep in mind. There have been several Earths, but we've had one version of Earth for the past 11,000 years. The rupture in the Earth system, particularly in terms of the climate system, has induced climate extremes. And as I started this presentation, is now a new reality. And this has been confirmed by the current IPCC 6th cycle of reporting. We are heading towards irreversible and abrupt change in terms of a new operating state for planet Earth. Earth is responding to the destruction of life-enabling systems. So we're seeing climate extremes, for instance, but it is also shifting its operating state. In other words, it is against the Holocene biosphere. We're basically in uncharted territory in terms of the future of Earth and biota, that is the sum total of all life forms on planet Earth. These are planetizing processes and effects which no society can escape. We are going to witness increasingly the disappearance of societies, and frontline island states are probably the first that will disappear. Some parts of this planet will become unlivable. And essentially, we are in a post-Westphalian and post-imperial world in the making. So how do we kind of make sense of all of this? And Earth scientists and climate scientists and biologists have thrown a very important concept in our direction. It's the concept of the Anthropocene. And it's a very interesting notion. It's an alarm bell. It is an incitement to think a bit more deeply about our relations with planet Earth. It is a question, it is a hypothesis, and it is something that, if you like, social sciences have to take very, very seriously. This idea is one of the most important ideas in the 21st century, and two scientists, Eugene Stormer and Paul Crutzen, articulated it in 2000. And the crux of this is that humans are a geological force. We are shaping the planetary conditions on planet Earth. Now, critical science scholars who've kind of engaged with this idea, and there's an interesting debate raging beyond international relations, reject this discourse in some respects. Many feel that it is asocial. It gives us a very vacuous understanding of social dynamics, and really doesn't kind of help us understand deeper processes that explain what's going on. And of course, there are various candidates that have come to the fore, neologisms, if you like, Capitalocene, Capitolinian, and so on and so on. But essentially, if we come back to IR, there's a clash between the Anthropocene discourse and IR theories, assumptions, and images of the world. It provides us with an epistemological challenge because, I mean, here's an explanation. Human beings are basically shaping everything on planet Earth. They're shaping our societies, economies, ecosystems, the Earth system, etc. And IR explains change and dynamics very differently within its paradigms and approaches. And so there's a challenge here. And the response from IR has been underwhelming. And this has been documented. Now, I want to put forward a kind of decolonial IR critique, not rejecting the Anthropocene, but I just want to highlight two important issues here. The first is that I believe that the Anthropocene discourse is anchored in a dualism. It is skewed towards human agency, but it does not speak to the Earth response and shift. In other words, it inadvertently or maybe unknowingly gives us a passive Earth in its framing. Second, I think it fails to historicize the ecocidal logic of capitalism, the mass-scale destruction of human and non-human life. It does not, if you like, place the periodization of the Anthropocene within the context of the making of even proto-capitalism, circa 1492. So, mainstream IR, to deepen the point, cannot grasp the Earth response and shift that we are living through for various reasons. Firstly, it occludes natural and Earth relations. It is theory built on the human nature, if you like, binary, and it is theory built on that. It is theory by humans for humans. It is anthropocentric. It is also grounded in an imperial ontology. In other words, it is ethnocentric theory, and it is supremacist theory. It reaffirms a kind of vertical hierarchy in our world. It is also a theoretical paradigm and approach that focuses on internationalizing processes rather than planetizing processes and relations. Now, what does the Earth response and shift mean for IR? Can IR understand the planetizing processes and effects of the Earth response and shift taking place? Because this is our new reality. So, following on where I'm sitting in my own perspective on decolonial IR, I want to ask, can decolonial IR explain the Earth response and shift? Now, the Decolonial Knowledge Project is very, very important for us. Walter Mignolo, one of the leading thinkers in terms of this project, invites us to rethink the human. He argues that the colonial erasure of what came before colonialism is something we need to revisit as part of this process of rethinking the human. Sabelo and Ndlovu Gacheni, one of our leading decolonial theorists and thinkers on the continent, he critiques Eurocentricism from an African perspective. He calls for African epistemic freedom, and he basically provincializes Euro-American modernity. And his second move is to deprovincialize Africa and African thought. We also have various decolonial IR strategies that have come to the fore, critiquing the ontological primacy of imperial dominance, questioning the epistemology of Eurocentricism, questioning the objectification of countries in the global South, highlighting unequal ecological exchange, rejecting universal claims of the imperial core, and affirming that the non-European can think, so bringing in non-Western thought. But despite all this ground that has been broken more generally within the decolonial knowledge project and in terms of decolonial IR strategies, it has not problematized eco-coloniality sufficiently or adequately, in my view. And therefore, it provides a bridge to where we need to go to answer the question, or how do we explain the Earth shift and response? And I want to argue that one approach that can help us, a strand within decolonial thinking, a decolonial Marxist feminist ecology response, is very, very important. And here I want to argue that there's two Marxes, and there's a Marx that we must reject, and there's a Marx we must work with. There's an epistemological Eurocentric Marx, which believed that the West was the standard of civilization. But Marx breaks with that. And there's a non-Eurocentric Marx who embraces a multilinearity of history. There's an ecological Marx, rather than a productivist Marx, that focuses on alienation and the metabolic rift. And then, of course, there's the Marx who's not just about the white working class as the subject of history, but a Marx who also understands social reproduction as connected with production. And essentially, a Marx that is a crucial, a non-state-centric Marx as well, that is a crucial resource for this journey. I also believe that a decolonial Marxist feminist ecology response also offers something else. It offers a shift from Eurocentrism to Euro-Americanism. Eurocentrism was a concept articulated by Samir Amin, one of Africa's leading Marxists in the 1980s. And it's all about Europe placing itself at the center of world history and European philosophy and thought, part of the supremacist hierarchy. But I think a lot has happened since then. And we are literally living in a US-led world order. And we need to understand the specificity of the racializing logics of the making of North America and how that expresses itself within a supremacist framework, what I would call Euro-Americanism. What we also need to think with within this approach is resisting imperial and capitalist ecocide, and of course, provincializing the West and deprovincializing the South, but also decolonizing the Earth. Now, I think that this approach is very important for how we explain the Earth response and shift, and how we answer the question, what is the Earth responding to? And so we start with the origins of ecocide and capitalism and the commons, and the enclosures beginning with agrarian capitalism in Britain in the 16th century, mercantile capitalism in the Columbian moments, the emergence of private property as central to Western thought, and various theorists, whether it's Hugo Grotius, a legal thinker in Dutch society, or whether John Locke, basically providing theoretical justification for the appropriation of property, and this having deleterious consequences for indigenous peoples. Christianity has played its part in promulgating the idea of the domination of nature, and between the 1500s and 1700s, the scientific revolution also gave us a mechanistic conception of nature, part of the human nature dualism. And in that context, a hierarchy of exploiting the nature, women, and of course the racial other. In the 1800s, we had again a continuity of this human nature dualism in kind of political philosophy and thought, with civilization versus the state of nature. And through accumulation, through ecocide and the conquest of nature over the past 500 years, we have now arrived at US-led neoliberal governance. It's premised on species extinction, the genocidal violence against indigenous peoples, war, the domination of women, and the racial other. And central to this is the destruction and appropriation of communal tenure and marine tenure systems. The Industrial Revolution and carbon extraction has accelerated this process coming out of the 19th century. So to answer the question, essentially the Earth is responding to the supremacy of Euro-Americanism and its ecocidal logic. Those of us in the peripheries of capitalism have not brought about this rupture. So the great acceleration from the 1950s that Earth scientists talk about has a material foundation. It's rooted in the proliferation of mass production for mass consumption, which was very much an idea that the United States pioneered after World War II, Fordism, going global, middle-class affluence, household technologies in the realm of reproduction, 20 oil wells driving industrialization, and now, with declining rates of output, new extraction of complex hydrocarbons, and carbon democracy mutating in this context. Unequal ecological exchange as the basis for the supremacy, again, a hierarchy between the global north and south, with extractivism at the center of this, and Africa still an imperial subject. So essentially, the US-led world order, which we inhabit, in which we're all meant to be Americans, is in the fourth great crisis of capitalism, a civilizational crisis. And essentially, it is premised on the domination of nature. It has not learned lessons, and it has not reflexively rethought its place in the world. In short, it is incapable of ending the war with nature and accumulation through ecocide. So accumulation through ecocide has serious consequences, particularly climate apartheid. Hurricane Katrina and Maria revealed, for instance, how, if you like, the weaker sections, the most vulnerable sections of American society were impacted. 33 million people recently impacted in Pakistan with widespread flooding, 40 million hungry in Southern Africa during our recent El Nino-induced drought. The cyclones Idai and Kenneth in 2019 devastating Mozambique, Malawi, 2.2 million people needing emergency assistance, mainly women and children. A deadly flood in my own country in April last year, killing 500 people and damaging massive amounts of infrastructure. Flooding at the start of Nigeria's rainy season in 2022, impacting thousands of people. A 4-year drought in the Horn of Africa, together with several conflicts, resulting in over 20 million people facing starvation. About 200 million Africans will be facing climate displacement by the end of this decade. So I want to return back to looking at Earth and Earth relations and natural relations differently. So Eugene A. Cernan was the last person to walk on the moon. And there's a beautiful quote from a book called What is Life by Lynn Margulis and Dorian Sagan. And I just want to read the last part, which says, when you look back home and you don't see the barriers of color, religion, and politics that divide this world. Now, we have to bring Earth relations and natural relations to the center of the challenge of ending the war with nature. International relations as a discipline emerged at the beginning of the 20th century with the promise, with the ambition, with the normative impulse to end war. But we know that the 20th century was marked with several wars, and I'm not sure whether IR theories had any consequence in that context, maybe implicated in a lot of that. So we need to think about Earth democracy as an exit. We need to think about the Earth and its systems as res commune, meaning common property. Over 7 billion people are commoners on planet Earth. The natural commons extends from land, water, biodiversity, energy, creative labor, and the Earth system that we've been referencing. It's the foundation of our life worlds for everything that we need. At the same time, the climate crisis is a transboundary problem. It is involving planetized commons relationships, and it's a problem that cannot be solved by nation states. The UN COP process bears testimony to this. Both the climate and biodiversity processes have failed, and we are facing a 1.5 degrees Celsius overshoot within the next decade. We need to start building Earth democracy in our communities and the front lines of vulnerable spaces. We need a global climate justice bloc of vulnerable states, island states, countries devastated by climate shocks, countries facing twice the global average of heating, peoples, workers, and movements. So to bring it all together, how do we move from IR to decolonial Earth and natural relations? How do we bring decolonial Earth and natural relations into IR and vice versa? And for me, what I'm putting forward is an agenda, if you like, to upend our discipline and rethink it and reground it. So the first thing I think that's very, very crucial is eco-philosophy. We need to think about Earth ontology. We need to think about the totality of Earth relations and natural relations. And we need to think about Earth supremacy. Because no matter what the conceit is within, if you like, Euro-Americanism, the United States cannot defeat the Earth. So Earth supremacy is very, very important for us to understand. We also need to understand its planetizing processes in terms of the Earth responses and shift that's happening. And that means, as I've been saying, the shift beyond a post-imperial and post-Westphalian order. We need to bring into our thinking big history. And here I'm talking about the Big Bang and the larger cosmological processes in which we need to locate Earth. We need to look at the geohistorical analyses of Earth that's been done, and we need to think with that to understand it. We need to have Earth thought centrally in our conversation. And yes, that means Earth science, that means various Western philosophers, but it also means looking to indigenous thought. It means looking to other modes of thinking, African thought on eco-philosophy and the Earth and natural relations. It basically means pluriversal thought has to come to the fore. We also need to think very carefully about planetized living now and the power of Earth and how that's going to feature in every sphere of our life world and existence, and how that connects with the biosphere and extinction. These are interconnected, and it's going to have implications for international relations, for societies, for ecosystems, and so on. We also have to rethink the human. We have to find the eco-human or the earthling conception of who we are and rethink an ethics of care. This is fundamental, if you like, for a paradigm shift. And then, of course, we need to grapple with this question of the Earth Commons and global governance of this Earth Commons. The interstate system that we have, as I've argued, is incapable of dealing with the problems on a planetary scale, and it is, if you like, not going to rise to the challenge. We need a new imaginary around how we coexist within Earth relations and natural relations, and how Earth relations and natural relations exist within us. We need a new institutional architecture on a planetary scale. Joe Biden and the US policy establishment were rather disappointing. Many of us assumed that they would consider his ascendance into the White House a 1945 moment and that there would be at least an attempt to advance a whole new approach to the interlocking polycrisis of our times, but that hasn't come to the fore. Instead, we are faced with liberal imperialism and a continuity with multilateral institutions that are rather sclerotic and incapable of rising to the challenge. We also need to consider Earth futures as part of the shift to decolonial Earth and natural relations within international relations and beyond. So to conclude, I would like to say that IR is not a social science, but a socio-ecological science, and science in inverted commas. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Dr. Satgar. Great presentation. I think there's a lot of interesting material, a lot of things that we could potentially discuss. But before opening up to questions, I am going to take advantage of my role as chair and discussant to ask two of my own questions for you to answer, as our audience thinks of other questions they'd like to bring up. I have a more specific and a more general question for you. First, about the concept of the Anthropocene, right? You mentioned quickly and shortly that there's some debate on whether that's a good concept or not, right? You mentioned the concept of Capitalocene, and there have been other suggestions of better concepts as well. And I'd like you to talk a little bit about why you've decided to stay with this concept of the Anthropocene, considering the critiques that have been put against it. I'm thinking also because in this question of a nature-human divide or human-nature divide within mainstream international relations and mainstream social sciences in general, what is that human that we're talking about? What encompasses that human? You know, specifically considering that in geopolitical politics and international system, the humanity of the majority of humans is denied, right? So even if when we're talking about the human nature divide, is it really a human nature divide that we see, right, within within academia, right? So that's the first question. And my second question is, how would you respond to different academics, intellectuals, and even let's stick with intellectuals for now, but how would you respond to intellectuals that recognize the importance of these topics, but they might say, well, but I don't study the environment, right? I'm interested in security, or I'm interested in global governance, or I'm interested in whatever other subfield. So let's let these people who are focused on the environment and interested in environmental politics study these questions, and we'll deal with this, what I deem more important for my own focus here, right? So in a way, my question is a question about interdisciplinarity, right? So what's the importance in the context of IR as a social science to think about interdisciplinarity and think about like the segmentation or disciplinization or subdisciplinization within the field?
Excellent.
So I'm going to pass the word on to you, and
thank you.
Our audience can either write questions in the chat or raise your hands.
Okay, so these are great questions. Thank you, Rafael. So let's go with the Anthropocene concept. So, as I mentioned, there are other candidates. One of them is the Capitalocene, an idea that's articulated by Jason Moore. And I think it's a very, very important idea. It has a particular historicizing of the making of capitalism over a 500-year period, and its destructiveness vis-a-vis the web of life. And essentially, I mean, his argument ends up where capital is integral to what is the Capitalocene and the epoch that we are living in. In other words, we are living in a world that is in the image of capital. I don't necessarily agree fully with that. I do think that the world we are living in and all social relations and social processes are unfinished. Okay. I also think that, you know, even with Euro-Americanism and supremacy, there hasn't been a total obliteration of a difference. And so there's something there that bends the stick too far for me within the Capitalocene framework. On the other hand, I think that if you look at somebody like Donna Haraway's notion of the Chitalocene, I'm very uncomfortable with the rejection of the idea that truths are just, you know, context bound and they are specific and they are particular and so on. I mean, the earth implicates all of us, and earth science actually gives us a larger truth, okay, beyond kind of cultural specificity. And so for me, I'm kind of very alive to the limits of us just kind of reducing things to cultural particularity. I don't agree epistemologically with that. So, I mean, I think the Anthropocene concept has a lot of subversive potentials, and it has the potential to kind of place the mirror up to the powerful, to weaker countries, to humanity, for us to think about this human nature relationship and where it's going. And that's what I try to do by adding a twist, the earth shift and the earth response, because that's the real drama. I mean, that's the real stage we are occupying. And I think if we think with this and we stay with this idea, then we understand what the real stakes are. At the same time, I think that there's room for critical engagement with the Anthropocene concept at a whole host of levels, whether you ground it in a different kind of historicization, whether you want to ground it as the decolonial Anthropocene, and so on. So there's, and bring in racializing logics, etc. There's a lot we can do with the concept to, if you like, resituate it and reframe it without losing the possibility for dialogue. I mean, what we need is a multivocal conversation. Climate scientists have been brave enough to step in front of humanity and break that ground. Now, they alone do not have a monopoly on this question, and I think within the discourse of the Anthropocene, they understand that. It cannot be technocratic vertical speak. It's got to be a multivocal conversation. And I think that's what's important about this concept. We already have a constituency, earth scientists, ecologists, etc., grappling with this issue. And there's a need for us to add our voices to that and to democratize that discourse. And I think that that's very, very important. And for me, I think the moment we reduce it to alternative categories, we suddenly shifting the stage, we are shifting the conversation back into our little quarters, into our little spaces, etc. And maybe that's a political point from my side. The point about, I mean, you actually asked me 3 questions, by the way. The point about nature and the human, and, you know, what is that human? So, I mean, again, reading the decolonial thinkers, they really help us understand what has come out of the Renaissance, the Enlightenment, and what is this human subject that has been constructed within sort of Eurocentric thinking. And it's a subject that is, firstly, very much about the self-will of the individual, okay? And in a sense, an individualism, and today a hyper-individualism, if you think about that. At the same time, It is an individualism that is taken beyond an embeddedness within natural relations. I mean, different thinkers have approached nature differently, and I've alluded to this. For somebody like Immanuel Kant, it was, well, we need to shy away from the state of nature, and we need to reach this higher level of humanness and civilization, which, of course, was this kind of Eurocentric standard and reason and so on and so on. And so that turning of the back against natural relations, separating out the human, was constructed. And it is something that has traveled into the world, into our contemporary world, through colonialism, imperialism, and is now planetized as who the human should be. I alluded to the fact that we're all meant to be Americans, but as part of this whole process, okay? We are now, wherever we live, no matter what societies or ecosystems we live in, etc., there is one dominant way of life, and one cultural conception of who we should be. So that's something that also, I would argue, has informed the knowledge project in the humanities and the social sciences to a large extent. I mean, most of the core thinkers, say in sociology, for example, Marx, Weber, Descartes, I mean, the way that is taught, for example, as a canon in sociology, does not fully grapple with natural relations. And so, you have a sub branch coming out of that called environmental sociology at some point, but the canon is framed in an anthropocentric way, which leads me to your question about IR and the IR discipline. I mean, listen, I'm not against people having subspecializations and focusing on their particular research interests and so on. But I am about arguing that we disrupt the canon of IR. I am arguing that beyond the kind of realism, neorealism, and neoliberal institutionalism and constructivism, and even world systems to some extent, we actually have to have a radical transformation of that canon in terms of natural relations and earth relations. We cannot ignore the fact that, as I've been saying and arguing, that the response of Earth is going to impact everything and everyone in every society, in every state, in every economy, and it's already begun. And so the frameworks we have, if they do not take that on board, they're going to be irrelevant paradigms. They're not going to be able to speak to these realities. So yeah, I hope that clarifies where I'm coming from.
Oh yeah, it did clarify my questions, especially that last one. I think my question was not necessarily geared towards this idea that people should change their focus of study or research, but that they should face these questions that you just posed, right? So basically, what does the Earth response inform? How does the Earth response inform your own research? I think that's a question that everybody can ask, independent of whether they're working within environmental politics or not.